John, Margaret.
Hi, welcome to the museum. Thank you for coming to Happy Haunting at the museum today. This is the first time we've done this event, and I hope it will be a success. I guess the acts will not thank me for saying I would like to make a couple brief announcements, and they're very brief. One, I'd like to introduce Nick Foster, who is the Historical Society president this year. And he's doing a good job, so we're thrilled to have him. Secondly, I would like to say that we have an event coming up next Friday at the Scranton Methodist Church. It's called Animals of Greene County, and it's with Dan Sayer of Greene County Conservation. If you want to come to the lunch, it costs $10, and you need to RSVP in advance. If you want to just come to the program is free, and it'll start at 12:45. On December 1st, we're having our Christmas annual program at Greenwood, so keep that on your schedules. And I would also like to announce that Carol Schultz gave a program here at Leaping Through Greene County History on some French journalists who came to Jefferson. And she has received the English copy of the magazine. The library has Xeroxed a copy of the portion that just pertains to Greene County for us, and we're going to have it at the museum. I'll leave it on the back sign-in sheet plate table in case you want to look at it today. But there is a display at the library now. So if you want to stop in and look at it, you can. There are a lot of people you'll recognize. There's apparently a young Rick Morain. There's a 12-year-old. They're Bob Talene, Francis Cudahy. The family that is really featured is Cecil and Eleanor Barrett's family, and there are just tons of photos of them. So that's all I'm going to say today, and then we're going to get on with the program. Rick, would you like to take us off?
I will. You probably thought you were going to sit here and just listen, but this is going to be audience participation.
Oh, no.
I'm supposed to play either scary music or auto music. You may not be able to tell which. The first theme, this is from a TV, a weird haunted family, which most of you will recognize. And the participation part is, when I stop, you'll recognize what to do. Either clap or snap your fingers. Okay?
Winston Churchill, I'll just tell you a brief story before we start. Winston Churchill told a story all the time about seeing a ghost at the White House. And can you guess whose ghost he saw? Lincoln. It was Abraham Lincoln. And Winston Churchill was taking a bath, and he got out of the bath, and he was naked, and he had a cigar in his mouth. And he walked into the bedroom, and Lincoln was sitting there in a chair, looking at him. And Lincoln said, "Good evening," or Lincoln didn't say, Churchill said, "Good evening, Mr. President. You seem to have me at a disadvantage." Which Lincoln smiled and then disappeared. And I don't know if that's true or not, but that was a story that Churchill told all through his life. Our first ghost today is Roger Aegerter as Nathaniel Greene. Nathaniel Greene is the person that Greene County was named after. Roger, would you like to come up?
The music takes me back to when I was with General Washington and his wife Martha. My wife Catherine and I would spend many days at Mount Vernon because music was very important to them. They had a piano, they had a harpsichord, and Martha had a niece, a great niece, that really could play the piano and entertained many of us all the time. Some of this time was during the war, and so we would come and go, and sometimes we'd have to go and come fairly fast because there'd be people around. So my name is Nathaniel Greene. I was born in 1742, which makes me, at this point, 281 years old. I'm a little bit older than I believe some of the other ghosts that are going to be here tonight, so I'm quite old, so that means I might have to use some notes. Because my memory's not quite as good as it used to be. So please forgive me if I have to refer to my notes. So George would also say he was a great fan of music and beer. He made beer, and I think he had a whiskey on his farm too, on the mountain. Nothing is more agreeable and ornamental than good music. Remember, during this time, the late 1700s, there wasn't any TV. There wasn't any radio. Their entertainment was telling stories and playing music for each other. So music was a very important part of the life in this era. So, Nathaniel Greene, I think you're familiar with the name. This has an extra E at the end, and this county is named after me. There's 16 other counties in the United States named after me, after Greene. I don't know if that makes me important or not. I think there's probably more named Washington than Greene. I was born in 1742 in Warwick Township in Rhode Island. That's about 63 miles southwest of Boston, which was the hub of the universe at that time for people in the colonies, I should say. The Greene family had been one of the first important families in Rhode Island and had been there 130 years. And a family friend of ours was Roger Williams, who was the instigator, the historical person of Rhode Island at that time. I was basically homeschooled. My father was a Quaker minister, and so he didn't really believe in education and stuff. He believed in the church, and so most of my education was homeschooled, what you now call homeschool. I read a lot of the Bible and worked a lot. He didn't believe in books, but he was happy that I was trying to get my own education. My family ran a place where they made steel, and our main thing was making ship anchors. And so I don't know if you noticed, as I walked up here, I had a little limp. And the limp is from pounding the bellows day after day, month after month when I was young. And so it hurt my leg, and so I walked with a limp basically the rest of my life. I also had asthma as a youth also, so I was not very athletic, and I didn't, although we didn't have many athletic things going on at the time, it hindered my ability to get outside and run and play things at that time. Although I did grow up to be this size. A little over 6 feet tall and about 200 pounds, and so I was a fairly large person for that time. George Washington and I were about the same size. So in 1770, I moved to Coventry, Rhode Island to take charge of the family operation, the foundry, just prior to my father's death, who he died in 1770. When I moved into Coventry, I was one of the first ones to promote public school. I was elected to the Rhode Island General Assembly as a legislator, which I was re-elected 3 times over the next few years. I was about 32 years old in 1774 when the Boston Tea Party happened. Is everybody familiar with the Boston Tea Party? So that was a protest by the Sons of Liberty, protesting the English Parliament's tax on tea. About 100 men dressed up as, I'm going to call them Indians, you call them Native Americans, got onto the ships, onto 3 ships, and threw 342 chests of tea overboard. It's a lot of tea in the harbor. And in today's money, in your money is worth about $1.7 million that was thrown into the harbor. And so this is one of the first things that kind of instigated the breakaway that the English got upset about and started sending their troops over here. And the taxes were instigated to begin with to pay for their soldiers in the colonies to keep them here. So this really kind of riled them up. In 1774, I married Catherine Littlefield. At the time, she was 19 years old, and I was a little bit older. I was 32, so. We had 6 children. It's also a bit of an oddity that she named one of our children George Washington Greene, and one of our girls Martha Washington Greene. This was kind of before we even knew who they were. Our 3rd child, Cornelia, was conceived at Valley Forge. It was a cold and lonely winter. In August of 1774, I helped organize the local militia, because now the Redcoats, the English were sending troops in, and they were even putting more taxes and more limits on what we could do. So I was the head of the militia at this time, so I made a trip to Boston to buy a musket. Because you probably remember from history that the people that fought in the Revolution on the colony side, it's not really an organized army. They would have farm boys coming off the farms with pitchforks and swords that they had. They didn't have guns, and if they had muskets, it was very rare. So the equipment that the colonists had was very poor at the time. So I went to Boston to buy a musket for myself, and I was watching the British troops do all their routines on the square in Boston, and I was very impressed. And so on my way back, I found the British soldier that had decided he didn't want any part of them anymore. So I brought him back to Rhode Island with me, and he became one of our main people that trained our troops to fight against the British. At this time, my rank was private, as you might guess. We started out pretty low in the militia. But Rhode Island, as things started progressing, Rhode Island asked for 1,600 men to be brought into the militia, and they made me commander, which was the rank of Major General. So I went from private to Major General in about 2 weeks. Soon I was made Brigadier General. On July 4th of 1775, George Washington happened to come through to review our troops. That was the first time I met him, and it became a lifelong friendship that we had. As we went along, I'm sure you've heard of Valley Forge too. During the winter, Valley Forge it was a horrible winter. All the troops were assembled in Valley Forge, and they were out of supplies, and it was a dire situation. So Washington assigned me to be commander of Valley Forge. But what he really wanted was, because I had the ability to organize people and to get things done, to make sure that the troops did not just die off, because we were losing troops that they were going home because they didn't have anything to eat, and so they were going home. And so it was my job to find food and to keep them there and to keep them warm. And so that was one of my important jobs. Later on, I was assigned the commander of West Point. This was just after Benedict Arnold kind of turned a traitor and told the British how they could get to West Point and how to take it over. And he skedaddled down the river to one of the British ships and went off to England and never came back. And so I was assigned to be the commanding chief of West Point at that time and to kind of bring it back to life. So I was second in command, kind of, to General Washington during the Revolutionary War. And people over the years, I've heard, people said to me that I was the second most important general in the war behind Washington. And General Washington had been said many times that if he ever died or was captured, that I should be the commander-in-chief of all the armies. That never happened, of course, but I was assigned to be the general in the southern occupation down in the Carolinas and Virginia and places like that. And it was at that time, again, I heard and it said that my tactics down there in fighting off the British was what kind of saved the war. We saved the Carolinas and kind of drove the British back out to the ocean again, to the sea. They called my tactics guerrilla tactics, You've probably heard of that over your time. Because again, our soldiers on our side, on the colony side, were not really well organized. So they hid behind trees. They set booby traps. And so as the British would walk in lines down the road, like you've seen, we would just pick them off, one after another. And so that was my tactic to win the war, and that tactic at that time worked. So the end of the war came, and the Southern people were so thankful that I had kind of saved their country that they gave me 5,000 guineas, which in today's money is about $50,000, I believe, and about 20,000 acres of land in Georgia. And the land is called the Mulberry Plantation. And so I was offered to be Secretary of War by Washington when he became president, and I turned that down. I had really had enough. I think I mentioned that my father was a Quaker preacher. If you know anything about Quakers, they're a passive people that don't believe in fighting, don't believe in war. And here I ended up to be involved in it to my chin.